mechanisms here, and that's why consumers are feeling it more, and insurers kind of shoot back and say, well, that doesn't change the fact that these prices are increasing, and if consumers wouldn't be feeling them otherwise. So we have seen that under Obamacare, kind of a more prominent focus on what consumers are paying out of pocket and increasing deductibles. But I think it's hard to kind of point and say that's the reason or that's the cause.
We heard the previous caller talk about his experience with EpiPen and paying for it and how much insurance covers. Generally, do insurance companies cover a good deal of the cost of EpiPen, or not much, or what ratio is there?
Yeah, I think it varies plan by plan. I mean, if you have for example, hypothetically, if you have a plan that requires you to meet a $3,000 deductible before they start kicking in, I mean, that's 5 EpiPens, and so if that consumer goes and tries to buy one, most likely they will be paying that full $600.
Alexandria, Virginia, Democrats line. Hannah, thanks for calling. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. My question is regarding the expiration date, because I've been having the EpiPen for my daughter for the past 10 years. We have never had to use them, but I have to have 6 of them every year, 2 for home, 2 for school, 2 for after school. But what I've been noticing the past recent years is that their expiration date is much closer than what it used to be. It used to last for a year. Now sometimes they have to replace them within 6 months. So is there anything changing in the composition of the medication, or why is that happening?
Hannah, before you go, how much do you end up paying for the EpiPen?
It depends on my insurance. I used to have a copay. What I used to have to pay $20 for every 2 of them, so $60 for the 6. But then I got better insurance, and it got to $10 for every 2. And so it depends on my insurance.
Thank you.
So it is recommended that people switch out their EpiPens every 12 to 18 months, and this is so that medicine, that epinephrine, doesn't expire. And so, yeah, I think that you see people like Hannah, having to buy these new EpiPens every so often, whatever the recommendation is, usually every year. And so, I mean, I think that's a big part of why you're seeing this become such a big issue now, is because it's back to school time. And so if you have to if it's time to renew your EpiPen that you leave with your school nurse, it's kind of that mad rush right now of parents who are saying, hey, this is almost unaffordable for me and my children. On
our independent line, Mary out of Georgia. Mark, hello.
Hey, good morning, Pedro. Hey, I wanted to go a little bit off set what we're doing and make a recommendation for C-SPAN about energy. If you could look into magnetic energy, I'd appreciate that. And for your viewers, I'd like everybody to look up vaccines, the true weapons of mass destruction.
Let's go on to Jeff. Jeff in West Virginia, Democrats line.
Yes, good morning. The CEO of Mylan is the daughter of my state senator, Joe Manchin. And there was a controversy here a while back about her claiming to have a MBA from West Virginia University. They claimed she didn't have it. Anyway, they ended up giving her a MBA, and let me read this to you. In the ensuing controversy, the university announced in April 2008 that it would rescind however you say her name, degree. Michael Garrison, WVU president at the time, was reported to be, in quotes, a family friend and former business associate of, however you say her name, and a former consultant and lobbyist for Mylan. After a faculty vote of no confidence, Garrison and several university officials resigned. So if you could comment on that, did you look into like that aspect of it or anything?
I think there has been some past controversy there, but I think right now the focus is on Mylan and the pricing of EpiPens, and again, that relationship with Senator Joe Manchin, although once again, Senator Manchin has commented and says that he shares his colleagues' concerns about this issue and would like to kind of get to the bottom of it as well.
What's Congress's history in looking into the topic of rising drug prices? In 2015, they had the former CEO of Turing Pharmaceutical before Congress was talking about drastic price increases that his company put in. What resulted of that, and is there a history of Congress actually doing something in this space?
So I think we're at the point, and this is kind of how lawmaking works, where there are a lot of investigations, a lot of letters going out. We are seeing people like Martin Shkreli come into Congress and be asked to testify. The CEO of Valeant has been in there, Valeant Pharmaceuticals. These are kind of, I think what you're seeing mostly is the focus on these kind of one-off companies who have these, EpiPen-like drugs where the price increases overnight, and kind of lawmakers outraged about that and asking specific companies why this is happening. But I think behind the scenes and less in the spotlight of investigations and letters and whatnot, there is a growing concern about kind of your everyday drugs and just the cost of the healthcare system and the cost to patients and insurers. And so the discussion is only ramping up, I think.
What's the likelihood that we're going to see the CEO before Congress?
Just based on past experience, I would say it's probably pretty likely.
Let's hear from South Carolina, Independent Line. Gene, hello.
Good morning. This is my first time ever getting through to C-SPAN, and I'm just thrilled. And Caitlin, that is a great name. I have a couple of questions. Why now? Why did they raise the price so dramatically now? If you can answer that. The other question I have is, how much research do you do as opposed to consulting? Because apparently you didn't research this very deeply, Caitlin. Great name. I'll hang up. Thanks.
So I think that, first of all, that's the question that lawmakers are asking, why these price increases, why now? And I will say this didn't jump overnight. So as I've said, in 2007 is when Mylan acquired the EpiPen, and since it was kind of gradual increases year over year and over periods of time until we eventually reached that $600 list price.
Lebanon, Tennessee, Republican Line. Here is Adrian. Hi.
Hi, thank you for having me on your program. My big question is, my son requires an EpiPen for food allergies, and he has had some very close brushes too, so he really has to have this. Is there any type of indigent program, any type of copay assistance in the state of Tennessee for this?
EpiPen and Mylan, so Mylan has announced that EpiPen does have a discount program. It's had it before this whole controversy surfaced, and also it doubled down on that program as its first response to the controversy. So at a national level, there is coupons and assistance to help people with their cost sharing.
Caitlin Owens, you wrote recently about the topic of orphan drugs. What are they?
So orphan drugs they treat rare diseases, and so it affects a really small portion of the population. So there was a law passed a few decades ago that the issue was that if your population that can treat is small, then how are you going to recoup the cost of treating these costly diseases? So it's a law that incentivizes drug companies to create cures for these diseases that affect only a small part.
Diseases such as?
So there's some autoimmune diseases, kind of very specific kinds of cancers, things like that.
When was the law passed?
In the 80s.
And what have we seen as a result of the passage?
So we have seen a lot of new drugs come to market that treat these rare diseases, and they have been life-saving, and it's been a great thing for people with these diseases. But I think what you're also seeing is drugs coming to market under the orphan drug law and then being used for other purposes, that aren't for these small populations, and that's a little bit where the controversy comes from.
Give an example.
So say you have a drug that's created, for a disease that affects 50,000 people, and then all of a sudden it's discovered that this is purely hypothetical, but it could treat a common cold, and that's what it starts being used for, and then you get massive recouping the cost, and a massive profits there. So that's what the issue is here is, okay, if it's not being used to treat these small populations and it's still being charged that high price and having all these tax breaks and whatnot, then, is what's going on there.
Who's looking into this issue, and how is it being resolved?
I think it's kind of coming on lawmakers' radars. A lot of it is insurers are pushing that, hey, this isn't the way it was supposed to be used. But again, this is one of those kind of deeper issues under the drug price debate. It's not as prominent as, say, EpiPens or Martin Shkreli, where it's these drugs that are off patent that the list price has increased dramatically. This is a more complicated issue.
Michael is up next, talking with Caitlin Owens of Morning Consult. She's their healthcare reporter. Michael's from New York, Democrats Line. Michael, good morning.
Hi. I spent half a century in Hollywood fighting the copyright wars, except I was there to fight for the public domain. And this is a question not so much of copyright or patent, but of antitrust. In 1987, Ronald Reagan announced that he would not be pursuing any more antitrust actions. And it has progressed from that to this point now where these people, these big pharmaceutical companies with these drugs that anyone can make, they go to these small generic companies, and they have, in some certain cases, they have offered them $1 billion not to make a generic. And their theory is we can screw the taxpayer out of $9 billion over a period of time. This was the formula for one of these things where they stopped generics. They said we can soak the public for $9 billion, and we will pay you $1 billion not to create a generic. And this is how this kind of stuff comes about. I have been taking since 1974 two very common drugs. One is Soma, a muscle relaxer. Another one is Fioricet, which is a pain pill. I used to drive to Tijuana when I was in Los Angeles and buy them. I'd buy 1,000 Soma for $85, and I'd buy 1,000 Fioricet for $80. And these are they were made up in Southern California. Today, my doctor gave me a prescription for some Soma not too long ago, and for 20 pills, it was $138. Now, this is the kind of thing that's going across the board. This lies with the administration, with the president. They have to bring these antitrust laws.
Got it, Michael. Thank you.
So I think that this is another thing to bring up again about this kind of storyline with EpiPens. That there was a lawsuit a few years ago between Mylan and Pfizer to stop a generic from coming to market. There are generics in the works. There was an application recently. It didn't make it through for whatever reason. We might see that come back again. But I think in this case we did see an effort to stop a generic from coming to market.
We have a viewer who speculates on Twitter saying, is the price gouging going on knowing that competition is coming online soon?
That is something that happens. That's something that experts talk about, is where, especially, maybe not this case as much, but where if you have an instance where a patent is going to expire, these companies can increase the price in expectation of, okay, but there's going to be a generic that comes to market shortly, and so let's recoup these costs while we can. That was part of the EpiPen discussion when they thought that there was going to be a generic come to market in 2015, that maybe that was part of the price hike kind of rationale there. But again, that generic never materialized.
This is Samantha, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Independent Line.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. My question is based on basically there's all these reporters and stories, and the topic currently is why is there price gouging. My question is why aren't the journalists doing their job in reporting on who exactly is receiving the money from these big pharma companies? For example, Hillary has received almost $1 million from big pharma. And so how is she going to solve the problem when she's receiving money from big pharma? And then behind her, there's a long list of Republicans who have received tons of money from big pharma. Why aren't we reporting on that and talking about who these lawmakers are and who they're receiving their political donations from? I'll take the answer off the phone. Thanks.
Pharma is one of many, many organizations that donates money to political campaigns. And I think that you see politicians really struggling to figure out this issue because on one hand, pharma does produce a lot of pharma companies and pharmaceutical companies in general produce a lot of life-saving treatments and cures. And so while lawmakers want to facilitate that and bring new kind of miraculous breakthroughs to market, they also want it to be affordable for consumers. So it's a really tricky conversation.
One more call. Peter is from Douglasville, Pennsylvania, Republican Line.
Hi, good morning. My question is, when you go to the doctor, I've been on pain pills for years, and I take tramadol, and you go to the doctors and say he puts on there you can refill it 5 times. I take tramadol sometimes, more pills when I'm in pain and not. So at the end of when I go to get them refilled, I might have 2 refills left, but they say they can't refill it unless you go back to the doctor and get another prescription. Now, why won't they let you refill it until all your refills are completed? That's my question.
I think we do see a lot of consumer safety laws in this space, and there's a lot of laws and regulations to try to make sure there's not abuse, especially of prescription painkillers. And so I think that attention is only heightening around this issue with the opioid epidemic. And so while it might be inconvenient for some consumers, it also is designed to help deter abuse.
You can find Caitlin Owens reporting at the website morningconsult.com. She's their healthcare reporter. Thank you for spending time with us.
Thank you for having me.
Up next, it's our Spotlight on Magazine segment. The Atlantic's Steven Brill joins us for his piece looking at safety in the years past September 11th. And we'll talk about what's been done and what's been spent to keep the United States safe. That segment coming up next when Washington Journal continues.
Throughout this month, we're showing book TV programs during the week in prime time. In case you're not familiar with our weekend features, Book TV on C-SPAN 2 takes our public affairs programming and focuses on the latest nonfiction book releases through author interviews and book discussions. Our signature programs are In Depth, our live 3-hour look at one author's work, with questions from viewers via phone, email, and social media. In Depth airs the first Sunday of every month at noon Eastern. Afterwards is a one-on-one conversation between an author of a newly released nonfiction book and the interviewer, who's either a journalist, public policymaker, or a legislator familiar with the topic, and often with an opposing viewpoint. Afterwards airs every Saturday at 10 p.m. Eastern. And we'll take you across the country visiting book festivals, author events, and book parties, where authors talk about their latest works. Book TV is the only national network devoted exclusively to nonfiction books. Book TV on C-SPAN 2. Television for serious readers. At cspan.org, you can watch our public affairs and political programming anytime at your convenience, on your desktop, laptop, or mobile device. Here's how. Go to our homepage, cspan.org, and click on the Video Library search bar. Here, you can type in the name of a speaker, the sponsor of a bill, or even the event topic. Review the list of search results, and click on the program you'd like to watch. Or refine your search with our many search tools. If you're looking for our most current programs and you don't want to search the video library, our homepage has many current programs ready for your immediate viewing, such as today's Washington Journal or the events we covered that day. cspan.org is a public service of your cable or satellite provider. So, if you're a C-SPAN watcher, check it out at cspan.org. Washington Journal continues.
It's our weekly Spotlight on Magazine segment, and we're looking at a recent piece in the Atlantic magazine taking a look at the aftermath of September 11th and efforts to keep the United States safe. Is America any safer? And the author of that piece, Steven Brill, joining us from New York. Mr. Brill, good morning.
Good morning.
What led you to ask the question?
Well, I had done a book about the immediate aftermath of 9/11 in 2003 and had gone on to writing about lots of other subjects and doing other things since then. And as the 15th anniversary approached about a year ago, I started to think, well, I wonder what's happened. I wonder what we've done. How would you tally the score of how much money we've spent? Did we spend it wisely? Where did we waste money? What are our vulnerabilities still? How did it change the country? And I approached the Atlantic with this idea for a massive project to just take a real look 15 years later at what we've done and where we are today.
So how would you assess where we are today?
Well, I think we're a lot stronger. We did a tremendous amount in the immediate aftermath of 9/11 and since to change our security posture from what it was on September 10th, 2001, which wasn't much of a security posture at all. We've done a lot to batten down the hatches, so that's the good news. The bad news is that the threats have multiplied and they've changed. So while our defenses are stronger, the potential offenses are even stronger. In particular, we've gotten pretty good at being able to connect the dots intelligence-wise and detect the kind of orchestrated, carefully planned, multi-party attack that was the September 11th attack. We're pretty good at finding out about that kind of stuff, but while that's been going on, as you know, we've suffered a new kind of threat from so-called lone wolves or small groups, and even homegrown terrorists who don't have to breach our borders to get here and do us harm because they're already here. So, and that stuff is much, much harder to defend against, especially in a country where pretty much anyone can go into a store and buy an attack rifle, and go to a shopping mall and have the kind of firepower that other countries reserve for their police and for their military. So if you have the combination of lone wolves who are inspired by terrorist groups or who are just playing, so disaffected that they want to make their mark in the world in some way, if you have the availability of weapons, and if you have people who aren't deterred by the prospect of death, those kinds of threats are very difficult to prevent.
If you want to ask our guests questions about the safety of the United States in the years since 9/11, 202-748-8001 for Republicans, 202-748-8000 for Democrats, and for Independents, 202-748-8002. Mr. Brill, what's been the price tag for all this safety?
If you add it up, we've probably spent, just domestically, leaving aside the war in Iraq, which was supposedly a response to the 9/11 attacks and a response to the threats of terror, which it wasn't. But leaving that aside, we've probably spent something over $1 trillion. Some of it was very well spent. Probably 100 to 200 billion of it was basically just poured down the sinkhole. It was wasted on technology that government contractors in Washington promised would be infallible and that never worked at all. For example, we spent billions of dollars on a border security system that Boeing sold the government, that basically had to be taken out because it just didn't work. All these alarms and sensors on towers all across the southern border, and they sent out alarms when mosquitoes flew over the border. They couldn't see down hills. The whole thing was just a total fiasco, almost a comedy, except it was a very expensive comedy.
As far as money that was well spent, what would you give as an example?
Well, we certainly did a good job of preventing exactly the kind of attack that happened on 9/11. We have a much better trained security force at the airports, as much as we like to ridicule them. We fortified all the cockpits and airliners so that even if someone gets on a plane, they can't get access to the cockpit the way they did on September 11th. We've installed a lot of good technology at our ports so that various potential threats, such as radiological materials at the ports, can be detected. We, all up and down the country, we spent some very good money for Homeland Security in our major cities. Again, on September 10th, we were the kind of country where a natural gas pipeline was pretty much completely exposed on the west side of Manhattan, where it was running from the Midwest up to New England, and it came up in this place on the west side of Manhattan, and basically, anybody with a minor explosive could have set the whole thing off. There are hundreds and thousands of instances of vulnerabilities like that we spent money to really to fix. The tunnels, the train tunnels running under the Hudson River, to take another example, where I am in New York, were so exposed that basically someone with a backpack bomb getting on a train could have caused much more death and destruction and mayhem under the Hudson River than the hijackers caused on 9/11. We strengthened the train tunnels. And there are lots of examples like that. So this is a story of tens of thousands of real heroes in the Department of Homeland Security, in the FBI, in our local law enforcement agencies, now working together to make us a lot safer than we were on September 10th. But it's also a story of a lot of wasted money and a lot of wasted effort and a lot of political posturing.
15 years after 9/11, are we any safer? The piece by Steven Brill in The Atlantic for September, and he's taking your calls on this topic. Harry from St. Anne, Missouri, on our independent line. You're on first with our guest. Good morning. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. This is Harry Noelcaber, and yes, I'm from St. Louis. And are we safer? Definitely not. And the reason we're not safer is because I have been fighting with the NRA since 1976 over assault weapons with extended magazines. Why don't we buy those magazines back, put a drop-dead date onto them, and give those extended magazines to the military instead of buying them? We're wasting our money. We're trying to throw dollars at it to fix and put Band-Aids on things. This is ridiculous. Tell our elected officials to get their heads out of the sand.
Well, I certainly agree with that. And if you talk to law enforcement officials, Homeland Security officials, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, conservative or liberals, they pretty much agree that it is a suicide pact. It is insane to allow people, even people who are on a terrorist watch list, to have access uniquely in this country, easy access to assault weapons. There are lots of things that we can't prevent, but one of the things we can do is if someone is inspired by ISIS or is just plain crazy and wants to go into a school or go into a shopping mall or go into a church and shoot people, at least make it so that they only kill 6 people before law enforcement gets there as opposed to 30 or 70 or 200 people.
From Columbus, Ohio, Lee up next, Democrats line. Lee, good morning. Go ahead. You're on with our guest.
Yeah, so just a simple question for your guest, follow-up sort of to Harry of St. Louis. In your opinion, or would you comment on, would this be a safer country if we were able to institute I believe it would probably be a rebate program of some type where folks could turn in weapons, couple that with, registration of weapons, focused on removing assault weapons from the hands of the population?
Well, sure.
It would be a multi-year thing, but is it, in your opinion, doable?
It's doable. Australia did it, to give you an example. Various cities around this country have done it at various times, had turn-in programs for guns. This is not rocket science. We are the only country in the world that allows this kind of easy access to assault weapons. We even allow, and the NRA has even fought restrictions on armor-piercing bullets, whose sole purpose is to penetrate bulletproof vests worn by police officers. What is the hunting value of armor-piercing bullets? That's insane, and it's a relatively easy thing to do compared to the other challenges of Homeland Security, such as dealing with dirty bombs, radiological weapons, bioterror. This is something we could do that doesn't cost much money and is fairly straightforward.
Mr. Brill, one of the most obvious things we saw stemming from 9/11 was the creation of the Department of Homeland Security. How did that merge go, and how is it going now?
Well, as I explained in the article, it was a logical thing to do in many respects to take, just to give you the most obvious example of the logic, it used to be that when you arrived at the airport, if you were flying into the United States from another country, you were greeted and inspected at the airport by an Immigration and Naturalization Service person to make sure that you as a person was allowed into the United States, and by a customs officer to make sure that the materials you were bringing into the United States were okay to bring in. merging immigration and customs at the airport into one agency with one officer doing that obviously makes sense. It obviously made sense to take the various agencies responsible for various aspects of Homeland Security and also for recovery from a disaster. It made sense to put them together. That's the good news. The bad news is it created such a large agency that it has proven difficult, if not impossible, for any one person to run that agency and manage it in a responsive, efficient way. I think we've had a steady improvement. Jay Johnson, the incumbent secretary, my impression from all the reporting I did is that he is really focused on good management, on efficient management, and he seems to be having a good effect. But there is no mistaking the fact that this is a massive bureaucracy. There are all kinds of problems with a bureaucracy like this, but I think they've been making progress in the 13 years that it's existed.
How many agencies are under DHS now?
Depending on your definition, it's either 22 or 23, which sort of is almost indicative of how hard it is to manage if there's debate over how many agencies are even there.
From District Heights, Maryland, Independent Line, Tony, go ahead, please.
And the Republicans claim that they're for smaller government, and they're going to create the Department of Homeland Security. What a joke. What terrorism attack have they stopped? I'll answer that. None. Let me tell you this. Since 14 of the 19 hijackers were from Saudi Arabia, and this is the reason why I believe terrorism is a joke. 14 of the 19 hijackers are from Saudi Arabia, and we have not dropped one bomb on them. I guess if you have oil, it's okay for you to have terrorists. If you have oil to give us, it's okay for you to have terrorists. We're only interested in countries that we claim have terrorists that don't want to give us their oil. And we have the audacity to be overseas in other countries labeling their citizens terrorists. We're the only country that can get away with doing something so stupid. This war on terrorism is, and I'm going to tell you something else, it's starting to spread internal. We have cops treating black people like we're ICE.
Well, I don't agree with a single thing that caller said.
Clyde from Sicklerville, New Jersey, Democrats line. Go ahead, you're on.
Good morning, gentlemen. I feel unsafe, especially against foreign and domestic. Only reason why, not too long ago, we had a shooting on Egg Harbor Township in New Jersey at a Wawa and on the Atlantic City Expressway. A little girl in Camden got shot in the head by a stray bullet. You just feel unsafe. You're afraid to go anywhere.
Mr. Brill, also someone on Twitter references a point you made earlier, and they ask this: how flexible is Homeland Security today? Can they quickly adapt to the ever-changing approach of the terrorists? Are they proactive on that front?
Well, it's a combination of agencies. Homeland Security is much more engaged in sort of the nitty-gritty work of seeing who's coming in at the ports, at the airports, who's getting on our airplanes. The FBI is charged primarily with preventing an actual attack. And as I go into great detail in the article, they have adapted really radically and quite successfully, I think, since 9/11. On September 10th, 2010, the FBI went to John Ashcroft, then the Attorney General, and said, we need more money to fight terrorism. And Ashcroft turned them down. The FBI itself on September 10th, 2011, literally that day, briefed members of Congress and said that the current prime terrorism threat, this is September 10, 2011, was from animal rights activists. The turnaround in posture and positioning since 9/11 has been absolute. They've radically increased the size of the FBI, but more important, devoted lots of people, lots of resources to intelligence analysis, to connecting dots. The FBI and the CIA and the Department of Homeland Security constantly, daily share intelligence information, and equally important, share it, although sometimes in a grudging way, share it and exchange it with local law enforcement, who are the people who are on the front lines. So I think the adaptability, the flexibility is there. Having said that, there is a natural inclination among not only Homeland Security people, but politicians to fight the last war. In other words, whatever is currently in the headlines is what the politicians and members of Congress put pressure on the Homeland Security people to worry about. The example I give in the article is that you'll recall right after 9/11, a week after, there were the anthrax attacks, where someone mailed anthrax in an envelope to several media offices and offices of members of the Senate. And several people died. At that moment, bioterrorism was the watchword of the day. It was in vogue. We spent tens and hundreds of millions of dollars on biosensors to deploy in cities all around the country, but we never perfected the technology. The stuff doesn't work. When the headlines died down, we kept the biosensors out there. In fact, they're still out there in Washington and New York and in cities all across the country. There's one in Grand Central Station, these machines. And the consensus is that they don't work. But 15 years later, we've done nothing to improve the technology, even as we continue to spend $80 or $100 million a year just maintaining this stuff that doesn't work. And we don't hear anything about the threat of a bioterror attack anymore because it's not in vogue, it's not in the headlines. And the Department of Homeland Security, as I mentioned in the article, the officials were asked at a congressional hearing, which, by the way, not a single member of the press attended. If that hearing on bioterror had happened in 2001, it would have been standing room only. There was nobody there. And an Undersecretary of Homeland Security was asked, well, how you doing on this new technology that will actually work so you can detect a bio threat? And he said, well, we think we're probably 3 to 8 years away from a fix. So this is 15 years later saying we're 3 to 8 years away because it's not in the headlines. If someone mails another anthrax envelope to someone today, or if someone sprinkles it, God forbid, on the sidewalk somewhere, we will spend billions more to have that fixed by tomorrow. So that's a real problem. So there's flexibility, there's responsiveness, but there's also a tendency to run after the next headline, sort of the way soccer players who are untrained, everybody just runs at the ball and forgets the overall strategy and the overall game.
Here is Steven from Connecticut, Independent Line. Hi.
Hey, Chief. Thanks for taking my call. There's so much stuff to talk about. It's such a big in U.S. intelligence. I just want to talk about a couple examples to point out. Well, one is the overclassification, and then like the disconnect between, say, domestic intelligence and foreign intelligence. Let's take on stuff like some of the newer stuff, the cell phone threat in Paris, organized raids that took place in Paris. Now, an example of A+ work would be the Osama bin Laden raid. But all that stuff on the downside is so overclassified. Why don't the academics have it? Now let's go to some of more of the domestic stuff. The A+ side, the response to Boston, lone wolf attack. I would say they schooled people. But I still don't see enough communication between these extreme ends of U.S. intelligence talking about. Like, nobody's talking about the cell phone intelligence threat.
Gotcha, Stephen. Thanks. Mr. Brill.
Yeah, I didn't understand the question. shall we say.
He talked a little bit about information sharing, which you talked about. I remember after 9/11, there was this term called stovepiping, in which information would get stuck.
And connecting the dots is the opposite of stovepiping. We've done a lot to share information. We've also done a lot to deal with the reality of the fact that terrorism is going to happen. And this is where the politics sort of comes in. The Republican Party has attacked President Obama for admitting that some terrorist attacks are going to happen, and therefore, as a responsible president, he's got to spend money and effort on mitigation, lessening the damage from an attack, and recovery. So the Department of Homeland Security in recent years has paid for a series of drills all around the country in various cities to get all the local first responders, the state, the federal, the city people, the fire departments, police departments, ambulance drivers, to get them to have a coordinated plan in the event of a disaster, and they've practiced these plans. As it happens, about 6 months before the Boston Marathon bombing, the federal government, the Department of Homeland Security, paid for exactly that kind of drill in Boston. And as a result of that, because they had worked out in advance what method they would use to disperse injured victims to various hospitals around Boston, how they would deal with that, how they would communicate with each other, they were able to get the injured from that bombing to hospitals so efficiently and so quickly when it actually happened that miraculously nobody died who didn't die at the scene of the bombing. So that's planning, that's mitigation. It's sort of unsung. It doesn't make a lot of headlines, but there are efforts like that being financed and practiced all over the country. But President Obama, oddly enough, has been attacked by Republicans who say, well, if you talk about mitigation and recovery, you're throwing in the towel. Now, the fact is that we have to talk about mitigation and recovery because the real reality is the President Bush, who said right after 9/11, never again. This will never happen in this country again. That's just not realistic. It's especially not realistic in an age when you have, lone wolves or small groups with access to weapons who can be inspired rather than deployed from around the world. There will be terrorist attacks. The question in part is what we do to mitigate the damage, lessen the damage, and what we do to recover. And if we remember that the goal of terrorists is to scare us out of our way of life and to scare us into turning against each other to the extent that we're resilient when there is an attack, it foils their goals.
Louisville, Kentucky, Republican line. Ann is up next for our guest, Steven Brill.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you. I just wanted she said when I called that, do you feel secure? And I said no, which is almost a lie. I don't. I think this United States in terrible shape, and that's why I kind of want to go with Trump, because he is going to try to stop some of this violence and drugs from being brought into this country. And I think that's what's causing all the crime. It's so much drugs. It's even now starting in Kentucky. I heard that they were shipping truckloads in here, and it's sad on the news every night hearing that so many has died. It's terrible. And I feel that Clinton's not going to do anything about it, and at least Trump said he'd try. I mean, you got to have faith in somebody, and at least he's going to try. And I hope he does. I hope he does put a stop.
And apologies.
Well, let me just say, with all respect to the caller, if the topic is terrorism, in the article I wrote, I praise much of what President Bush and his team did. Tom Ridge, his first Secretary of Homeland Security, who I think was very effective, and I praise much of what President Obama and his team have done. But I must tell you that one of the areas in which both President Bush and President Obama deserve praise is they refused to take the bait and call terrorism a war against Islam. They refused to call it that, and the reason they did was the terrorists' major goal in their warped minds, what they want most of all, what they envision, is the great battle of civilization in which Western civilization fights a crusade against the Muslim world. That's the way they try to inspire people to join them. And President Bush never took that bait, and President Obama never took that bait, but Donald Trump takes that bait every day and makes this a war between us and the Muslim world. And to my mind, and I don't want to get involved in presidential politics here, but to my mind, he would be a great victory. His victory would be a victory for the goals of ISIS, which is to have someone who's a president of the United States declare war against Islam and incite more people over to their side.
Mr. Brill, you speak about a program in your piece called Countering Violent Extremism done under the Department of Homeland Security. Talk about that program and its proactive nature on these issues.
Well, what that program is trying to do, it's nothing more and nothing less than trying to sort of get to people, particularly youngish people, before they sort of go over to the other side, to reach people who might be disillusioned, might be disaffected, might be tempted to yield to the ISIS kind of propaganda online, and to find those people with online messages of their own, to go into the communities where those people might be and talk to their friends, their neighbors, their loved ones, and say, here's a way to reach these people, here's what you can do. It sounds really squishy soft, and it is, and it's the kind of thing where you can't really gauge results because you can't tell what you've prevented, but we'd be negligent if we didn't try to do it, because the other side is really trying to do it.
A $50 million price tag, you also say, for that program, too.
Right. But that's in money spent, all over the country for community groups, for websites, there's even a contest among colleges and universities to create the most effective peer-to-peer, age group to age group messaging in social media and online. So the $50 million is spread really thinly all around the place.
Let's hear from Michael in Dallas, Texas, Republican line.
How you doing?
Fine, thank you. You're on. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I'm glad Bush and Obama didn't, take that stance, didn't get suckered in, Too bad Bush got suckered in and going into Iraq, but that's another show, What I want to say is this, as far as a black man, black folks ain't scared, ain't scared of terrorism. Hell, we've been terrorized every single day we've been in this damn country. And
Don, up next, Gaston, Indiana, Democrats line.
Yeah, I watched that fiasco down there in Orlando that Sunday on CNN for 3 hours. The only good thing they did down there was that the first responders and the rest of them government people, the only thing they did was interview wounded people as they came out. They didn't send a damn soul in there to help anything. They knew there was only one shooter. Took them 3 hours messing around with their equipment before they ever did decide to go in. Hell, that's just another reason why people in this country, if you want any defense at your home or anything, you better have your own weapon. You can't depend on government at all. Thank you.
Mr. Brill, response to either of those calls?
Well, as for what happened in the bar in Orlando, I think we're waiting for the so-called after-action reports. Of course, you'd have to be skeptical of them since they're often written by the people whose conduct is being is under question. I don't think anybody, any person with common sense is against people having weapons for self-protection as long as they've been screened before they get those weapons, and as long as those weapons are not military weapons but are self-protection weapons. I mean, my basic view of the world, and this comes from talking mostly to law enforcement officers, is that we ought to treat guns like cars. We certainly all have the right to drive a car, but before you can drive a car, you have to prove that you know how to drive a car, and you have to register the car, and that, you have to prove you're qualified to drive the car. I think that's the common sense way to treat guns. And by the way, if you wanted a car, you could get a car, but you wouldn't be able to drive, an Abrams tank down the street, which is probably the equivalent of an AK-47 when it comes to guns.
202-748-8001 for Republicans, 202-748-8000 for Democrats, and 202-748-8002 for Independents. Mr. Brill, in the last couple of weeks, the topic of hacking and cybersecurity have come into light. You spend a significant amount of the piece talking about cyber terrorism. Where are we as far as protection from it?
Well, you never know. I mean, we're certainly much more aware of it, but and you can certainly, I was certainly able to interview lots of government officials who say they're working on it, 24/7. There's a whole cyber intelligence, control center that I visited and that I describe in the article. But frankly, you don't know. I think in some ways the threat has been overblown. I don't think our power grid is quite as vulnerable as some people have said it is. I describe in some detail, again, the kinds of drills and exercises that the federal government has encouraged, in this case encouraged those who own our critical infrastructure, who privately own it, such as the electric power companies or the water companies, to go through drills and simulate attacks. And in this case, the kind of attack most likely to come to the power grid would be a cyber attack. Having said that, you wake up every morning and you hear about something else, whether it's hacking the Democratic National Committee or hacking, an attempted hack of, a voter site in Arizona or something. So you really don't know just how safe or unsafe we are. I know there are a lot of people who spend a lot of time now worrying about it, but it's one of those things where for all the effort you spend, we could still wake up tomorrow morning and there'd be some kind of a significant catastrophe.
Here is Jim from Ohio, Republican line for our guest Steven Brill, contributor to The Atlantic, on his piece looking at the safety after 9/11.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm calling in regards to weapons in the hands of the citizens.
What do you mean by that, Jim?
What does our Constitution say? The Second Amendment. And I've asked people this, the word infringed, and how many people have read the Constitution? What is the definition of the word infringed? It states, I believe, to violate or to break the law. And I believe that it is declaring that if we are required, the citizenry, to have a permit, we are breaking the law, or the state is breaking the law, by making us have a permit to carry a concealed weapon.
Well, that, with all due respect, that may be what you believe, but the most conservative member of the Supreme Court in recent memory, Antonin Scalia, In the Heller decision, which was the decision that overturned the gun law in the District of Columbia, Justice Scalia himself said that this didn't mean that the government couldn't enact regulations to limit the kinds of guns and the circumstances under which people could have guns. And again, there's a clause in the Constitution that guarantees you and me the right to travel interstate. That doesn't mean that states can't require me to have a driver's license before I get behind the wheel of a car.
From Mike in Pennsylvania, Independent Line, you're next. Hi.
Hi. The people die in this country every year in large five-figure numbers from heart attacks, cancer, and diabetes. Even there's 600 people every year in the United States die slipping and falling in the bathtub. I was just wondering, why is there such a laser beam of attention on being afraid of terrorists and the terrorist danger when there's so many other things that can cause one's demise in this country that are much more prevalent? I'll take the answer on TV.
Well, that's a really good question, and it's a question I asked President Obama when I was doing this article, because you're exactly right. We regard terrorism as a different kind of threat. And I think it's because, first of all, we don't assume that we can slip and fall in a bathtub. And we don't assume that we're bad drivers. And we assume that we can control a lot about our health. And terrorism scares us and angers us because it's so unpredictable. Excuse me. And it involves innocent people. I mean, we didn't do anything to be the victims of a terrorist attack. And it really angers us because these people are our mortal enemies. We see them indiscriminately trying to kill, children. So and that's what terrorism does. It scares us and angers us because it's indiscriminate, it's unpredictable, and now we've seen in San Bernardino or in Orlando that it can happen anywhere. It's not just an iconic building or it's not just an airliner. You can just be in a community service center in San Bernardino or a bar in Orlando, and this can happen. So I think that's why it really it upsets us and causes us to focus more than the causes of death that you so rightly outline.
When writing the piece, Mr. Brill, what surprised you? Things that you didn't know before?
Something we haven't discussed. What surprised me was that we still haven't done enough about dealing with the threat of a dirty bomb, which is a bomb where you take radiological material of the kind that is used in a hospital or it's used in various industrial uses in food processing plants by logging companies. You take this radiological material and you mix it with a standard explosive, and it really scares people because when it goes off, the bomb might kill 2 or 3 or a half dozen people, but it produces radiation levels. When the police show up with their radiation detectors, as they now all do, it'll show radiation levels equivalent to a Superfund site around a large 30, 40, 50 square block area. And that will, in some ways, cause panic, cause you to have to abandon the area. I was surprised we hadn't done much about that, and including educate the public that those radiation levels are probably not as dangerous as the headline, the tabloid headlines might make them. The second thing I was surprised about, as I mentioned earlier, is we had not advanced the bio threat sensor technology beyond the rudimentary technology we had on the morning of September 11th. And that really shocked me and drove home the point that we continue to chase, today's headline as opposed to sit down and line up a list of threats and really assign a priority to them that is not based on headlines, but that's based on risk and based on the feasibility of dealing with the threat. We haven't done a perfect job of that. We've made progress, but we haven't done a perfect job of that.
Greg from Lorton, Virginia, go ahead.
Hey, good morning. Thank you for taking my call. I just got a couple things to say real quick. One is, when it comes to guns in our country, I've heard a lot of discussion about this. The fact is we're awash in guns. And the thing is the criminals have the high-capacity magazine, AR-15, AK-47,